All right, ready to explore something incredible. Today we're diving deep into the Northern Lights.
Yeah, the Aurora Borealis.
We've got a ton of cool info to share, all about how to catch this amazing natural phenomenon. Think of it as your ultimate guide. We'll talk best times to see it, places to go, even some wild stuff about how it can mess with our technology.
We'll cover that.
Oh, and you won't believe how Galileo totally botched the name?
Oh, yeah, that's a good story. But first, we got to get the science straight.
Yeah, for sure. Let's break it down.
Well, what's really cool about the Northern Lights is it's basically like a cosmic ballet, like choreographed by the sun and the earth.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Just picture this. Charged particles from the sun, they're riding on the solar wind, right? They slam into our planet's magnetic field and atmosphere.
Whoa, so we've got these tiny little solar particles crashing into Earth.
Yeah.
But why does that make the sky light up? Is it like a cosmic fireworks show or something?
You know, it's more like a celestial game of atomic billiards.
Okay, now you're really making me picture it. Go on.
So those charged particles collide with oxygen and nitrogen up in our upper atmosphere.
Yeah.
And when that happens, they energize those atoms. Then, as the atoms calm down, go back to their normal state, they release that energy as light. And that's what creates those incredible colors, the greens, the blues, sometimes reds, and even purples.
Wow, so it's like a cosmic collision creating this natural light show.
Mhm.
Incredible. Now, our guide mentioned something called Aurora seasons and an 11-year cycle. What's that all about?
Well, it's all about the sun's activity. Our star, it goes through this 11-year cycle with, periods of high and low activity.
Right.
And during the peak, which we call the solar maximum, we get way more solar flares and coronal mass ejections. So basically, more of those charged particles are just like hurled toward Earth.
Yeah, so more particles, more vibrant auroras. Got it.
Exactly. And guess what? We're actually heading towards the next solar maximum, predicted to hit around 2025.
Oh, so 2025 is the year for aurora hunting. Got to mark my calendar. But what about outside the solar maximum? Are there specific times of the year that are better for catching the show?
Oh, absolutely. While auroras can happen anytime, spring and fall are the prime viewing months, especially March, April, September, October. It's not just about darkness, though. It's also about the Earth's tilt and how it interacts with that solar wind.
Makes sense. It's all about positioning, like Earth is trying to catch those solar particles.
Yeah.
And our guide mentioned some websites like spaceweather.com and NOAA's POES. What can you find on those?
Those are your go-to resources for any serious aurora hunting. They give you real-time updates on solar activity, geomagnetic storms, and something called the auroral oval. That's the area where you're most likely to actually see the auroras.
So it's like checking the aurora forecast before you head out. Pretty cool. Now, I know we're all itching to know the best places to actually see this phenomenon. The guide mentions that while both the North and South Poles have auroras, we mostly just hear about the Northern Lights. Why is that?
It really comes down to geography and population.
Oh, okay.
The northern hemisphere just has way more landmass, and people are living closer to the auroral zone. It's just a numbers game.
Right.
More people are in the right place at the right time to see the aurora borealis.
Right, but get this. Our guide says during some major solar events, the Northern Lights have even been spotted as far south as Arizona and Florida.
Really?
Yeah, imagine that, those vibrant colors painting the sky in places you'd never expect. Must be an unbelievable sight.
Wow, it really shows you the power of those solar events and how important it is to keep an eye on those space weather websites and that auroral oval. It can really help you predict where and when you might get lucky, even in those unexpected places.
So we've got the timing down, but where should we actually go to see these elusive lights? What does our guide recommend?
Well, first rule of aurora hunting: escape the city lights.
Makes sense.
Light pollution is the enemy. It washes out those delicate auroral displays. The darker your surroundings, the more vibrant and detailed the auroras will appear.
Okay, so we're talking venturing out into the countryside, finding a nice wide open space far away from any artificial light.
Exactly.
And of course, packing those thermal layers because these prime viewing spots are probably pretty chilly, right?
Oh, for sure. Now, in the U.S., Alaska really stands out as a top spot for aurora viewing.
Alaska.
Yeah.
That must be quite an experience. What's it like chasing the northern lights in the Alaskan wilderness?
Okay, picture this. You're in a steaming outdoor hot tub surrounded by, snow-covered forests. Above you, this vast Alaskan sky stretches out like a canvas, and then, as if by magic, those shimmering curtains of light start to dance across the horizon, just painting the sky in those shades of green, purple, and red, truly magical.
Whoa, that sounds absolutely incredible, like something out of a dream.
It is.
And imagine combining that with, like, some daytime adventures in places like Denali National Park or checking out the Alaskan pipeline. That'd be an epic trip.
Oh, definitely.
So Alaska's on the list for sure. What other places does our guide recommend?
Well, besides Alaska, Canada, Norway, and Iceland are also famous for their aurora viewing opportunities.
I've heard Iceland is especially breathtaking, with the glaciers, volcanoes, and geothermal pools adding to the already incredible scenery.
It is.
But all of these places must be pretty cold, especially during those prime viewing months.
You're absolutely right. Since they're all located near the Arctic Circle, you gotta be prepared for those long stretches of darkness and some frigid temperatures. But trust me, witnessing those dancing lights, it's worth braving the cold.
Totally agree. It's an experience that's on so many people's bucket lists for a reason. Speaking of experiences, there are some interesting myths about the northern lights impacting human health. Like, some people believe they can improve sleep or even help with anxiety and depression. What's the scientific take on that?
While those claims are definitely intriguing, there's no solid scientific evidence to support a direct link between the northern lights and human health.
Okay, so for now, we can just soak in the beauty and wonder of the auroras without expecting any miracle cures.
Right.
But our guide does mention that the northern lights do have a proven impact on something else. Technology. How so?
Well, remember, those auroras are essentially a massive display of electromagnetic energy.
Right.
And that energy can disrupt radio waves, mess with communication systems, even impact power grids.
Whoa, so these beautiful lights can have some serious real-world consequences. That's a pretty stark contrast to those mythical health benefits we were just talking about.
It really shows how even the most beautiful natural phenomena can have powerful and sometimes unexpected effects.
Okay, let's head back to those European aurora hotspots. We've got Iceland on the list, but what about those Scandinavian countries?
Ah, Scandinavia, a true haven for aurora chasers. Norway, Sweden, and Finland offer just incredible opportunities to witness those lights. Think cozy cabins nestled in snow-covered landscapes with those mesmerizing auroras illuminating the night sky.
Now, I've always wondered, what's the actual difference between the Aurora Borealis, which we've been talking about, and the Aurora Australis? Are they totally different events?
That's a great question. And no, they're not different at all. It's actually the same phenomenon happening simultaneously at both poles.
Oh,
Aurora Borealis is just the name for the northern lights, while Aurora Australis refers to the southern lights.
so it's like a mirror image, with auroras happening at both ends of the Earth at the same time. But why don't we hear as much about the southern lights?
Geography plays a role again. The southern hemisphere's auroral zone is mostly over the ocean, with only a small portion over Antarctica. So it's much harder and way more expensive to reach and see the southern lights compared to those more accessible northern hemisphere locations.
So the southern lights are like a hidden treasure, waiting to be discovered by those adventurous enough to seek them out. We've talked a lot about solar activity and its role in creating auroras. The guide mentions something called a geomagnetic storm. What exactly is that, and how does it fit into the picture?
A geomagnetic storm is basically a disturbance in the Earth's magnetic field. It's caused by a shockwave from the solar wind. Imagine like a giant burst of solar wind hitting Earth's magnetic field. It causes it to fluctuate and become energized. And these fluctuations are actually what trigger those spectacular auroras.
So a geomagnetic storm is like a supercharged solar wind event, leading to even more intense and widespread auroras. That's fascinating. But speaking of other planets, the guide makes a surprising comparison to Mars. It mentions that Mars, unlike Earth, doesn't have a magnetosphere. What does that mean for the red planet?
Well, that's a crucial difference. Earth's magnetosphere is like a shield, right? It deflects most of the solar wind and protects our atmosphere. Mars, though, it lacks that protection, leaving its atmosphere vulnerable.
Interesting.
The solar wind is constantly bombarding its atmosphere, stripping away molecules and contributing to its thin atmosphere.
So while we on Earth get to enjoy the beauty of auroras, Mars is facing the consequences of not having that magnetic shield. It really makes you appreciate how fortunate we are to have that protective barrier around our planet. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I have to share a fun fact from the guide that really made me chuckle. It turns out, Galileo Galilei, the famous astronomer, gave the northern lights the name Aurora Borealis back in 1619. And guess what it means in Latin?
I'm not sure. What is it?
Sunrise wind.
Sunrise wind. That's an interesting choice. Makes you wonder if Galileo was observing the auroras during, a particularly windy sunrise and just made a connection, even if it's not entirely accurate in terms of the science behind the phenomenon.
Right. I can just imagine Galileo looking up at the sky, feeling the wind on his face and thinking, sunrise wind. That's what I'll call those mysterious lights. It's a little reminder that even brilliant minds can sometimes have, quirky interpretations.
And it highlights how our understanding of the universe evolves over time. Galileo, despite his genius, was limited by the scientific knowledge of his era. Today, we have a much deeper understanding of the forces at play, thanks to centuries of scientific inquiry and technological advancements.
That's a great point. It's a testament to the power of human curiosity and our constant drive to explore and understand the world around us. But for now, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our Northern Lights deep dive. We've explored the science behind those dazzling displays, the best places to witness them, even touched on their impact on technology. But stay tuned for part 2, where we'll get practical and dive into some tips for capturing the magic of the auroras through photography.
Now, I bet a lot of you are thinking, if I ever get to see these amazing lights, I gotta capture the moment.
Right. Who wouldn't? So let's talk photography. Our guide suggests DSLR cameras for serious aurora photography. I can definitely see why those would be awesome. For capturing all the details and colors, what makes them so special for this kind of photography?
Well, DSLRs give you way more control, over things like aperture, shutter speed, ISO, which are super important when you're dealing with low light. Plus, their larger sensors are just way more sensitive to light, so they can pick up a lot more detail in the dark. And then, of course, you can use long exposures, which is key for getting those dreamy, kind of flowing auroral displays.
Got it. So it's about gathering as much light as possible and having the control to really fine-tune the shot. But what about those of us who aren't, professional photographers? Can we still get decent photos with just our smartphones?
Oh, absolutely. Smartphone cameras have come a long way. A lot of them can handle low-light situations surprisingly well now.
That's good to hear.
The key is to really understand your phone's camera settings and use them to your advantage.
Okay, so give us the insider tips. What settings should we be tweaking on our phones to capture the aurora?
First off, if your phone has a night mode, use it.
Okay.
It's designed specifically for low light, and it's going to help brighten up the scene, reduce noise in the image.
Right.
Then you want to play around with the exposure. Increasing the exposure time, that lets more light hit the sensor. But be careful, if you go too high, you'll end up with a blurry photo.
Makes sense.
And then there's ISO. This setting controls basically how sensitive the camera is to light. Higher ISO means a brighter image, but it can also make the picture grainy.
Okay.
You'll need to kind of experiment to find that sweet spot.
Got it. Night mode, exposure, ISO. Anything else we should keep in mind?
Here's the most important tip for smartphone aurora photography, and this goes for DSLRs too. Use a tripod. Even the tiniest movement can blur the image, especially with those long exposures. A tripod will keep your phone perfectly still and make sure those photos are nice and sharp.
Right. Tripod makes total sense.
Yeah.
It's all about stability.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with those long exposures. Now, our guide doesn't mention this, but I'm curious, are there any apps that are especially helpful for aurora photography? Maybe something that predicts aurora activity or gives you more control over camera settings?
You bet there are. There are apps out there that can help you find dark sky locations, track aurora forecasts, even control your DSLR remotely. It's worth looking into those if you're really serious about getting that perfect aurora shot.
Great idea. Good tip. Okay, so we've covered the science, the best viewing spots, even some photography tips. Like we've got our own little Aurora starter kit now.
We do. And, we've been focusing on the technical side of things, but let's not forget about the just sheer awe and wonder that these lights inspire. I mean, throughout history, cultures around the world, they've created myths and legends about the auroras. They've seen them as messages from the gods, spirits dancing in the sky, even omens of good or bad fortune.
That's such a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the, logistics of aurora hunting, that we forget about the impact these lights have had on human imagination storytelling. For centuries, people have looked up at these dancing lights and felt a sense of wonder mystery.
It's true, and it reminds us that we're part of something so much bigger than ourselves, connected to the cosmos in ways we may never fully understand. And that sense of connection to something larger, that feeling of awe and wonder, it's something we could all use a little more of, you know?
Totally agree. It's what makes experiences like witnessing the Northern Lights so special, so memorable. So whether you're planning a trip to Alaska, Norway, Iceland, or even just hoping to catch a glimpse from your own backyard, just take a moment to appreciate that beauty, the mystery of these celestial wonders.
Absolutely. Let them remind you of the vastness of the universe, the interconnectedness of all things.
Beautifully said. And speaking of that interconnectedness, our guide actually delves into a bit of space weather history that really highlights how these solar events can affect us here on Earth.
Oh, yeah. There was that massive geomagnetic storm back in 1989 that caused a major power blackout in Quebec, Canada, left millions of people in the dark for hours. And get this, it even caused some satellites to, tumble out of control.
Whoa, so we're not just talking minor disruptions here. This was a serious event that really brought home the power of those geomagnetic storms.
Yeah, it definitely showed us that we're not as disconnected from the sun as we might think. These solar events can have a real tangible impact on our lives.
And it makes you realize that those, beautiful dancing lights in the sky are just one part of this much larger, more complex system. It's a reminder that we're all part of this incredible cosmic dance, whether we realize it or not.
Speaking of cosmic dance, remember how we talked about the auroral oval earlier? That area where the auroras are most likely to be visible?
Yeah.
Well, it's not static. It actually shifts and changes shape, depending on the intensity of the solar wind.
I had no idea it moved around. So it's not just about being in the right location. You also have to be there at the right time to catch the auroral oval in action.
Exactly. It's like trying to catch a wave. You got to be in the right spot at the right moment. And that's where those space weather websites we mentioned come in handy. They can actually help you track the movement of that auroral oval so you can, increase your chances of catching the lights.
So it's like having a secret weapon in your aurora hunting arsenal. Now, I know we're focusing on the northern lights, but you mentioned earlier that the southern lights are much less frequently seen. Is there a particular reason why they're so elusive?
Well, as we discussed, the southern hemisphere's auroral zone, it mostly spans the ocean, which makes it harder to get to. But there's also another interesting factor. The southern lights tend to peak during the winter months in the southern hemisphere, which, coincides with the Antarctic winter.
Oh, so not only is it geographically challenging, but the timing is also tricky. Imagine trying to witness the southern lights in the middle of the Antarctic winter. Talk about extreme aurora hunting.
Right. You'd be dealing with, freezing temperatures, blizzards, and almost 24 hours of darkness. It takes a special kind of adventurer to tackle those conditions.
But hey, for those brave enough to take on that challenge, witnessing the southern lights in Antarctica, that must be an absolutely unforgettable experience.
Oh, for sure. It'd be like stepping onto another world.
You know what else blows my mind about the auroras? The sheer scale of them. We're talking about these massive curtains of light stretching for hundreds or even thousands of kilometers across the sky.
Yeah, it's hard to grasp the sheer magnitude of it all, isn't it? It's like the entire sky is alive with these, dancing lights. It's a very humbling experience, a reminder of just how vast and powerful the universe really is.
And I bet it's a feeling that stays with you long after you've seen the lights. It makes you realize that, photos, videos, they can only capture a fraction of that experience. It's something you truly have to witness firsthand to fully appreciate.
You're absolutely right. There's nothing quite like standing beneath that, shimmering, dancing sky, feeling the chill in the air, and just knowing that you're witnessing one of nature's most spectacular displays. It's a moment of pure awe and wonder.
We're back for the final part of our Northern Lights deep dive.
There are three.
We've explored the science, best viewing spots, photography tips.
Yeah, pretty much everything.
We've covered a ton. But before we wrap up, we wanted to leave you with something to think about.
Oh, okay, I like that.
So throughout this whole deep dive, we've really emphasized understanding the science behind the Northern Lights. We talked about solar cycles, charged particles, geomagnetic storms, all that good stuff.
Right, right.
But there's another side to this story, a more philosophical side, I guess you could
That's
say.
why I like where you're going with this.
So imagine you're standing under a sky filled with those northern lights, all those incredible colors swirling and dancing around you. You're completely immersed in this breathtaking display. In that moment, do you think about the science behind it all? Or are you just completely lost in the awe and wonder of the experience?
That's a really good question. I think for a lot of us, it's probably a combination of both.
Yeah, probably.
We appreciate the science, we understand how those lights are created, but at the same time, we're just captivated by their beauty, the mystery. It's kind of like knowing how a magic trick works doesn't take away the feeling of wonder it creates.
Exactly. And that's what makes the Northern Lights so special. They bridge this gap between science and art, between knowledge and wonder, that remind us that the universe is a place of immense complexity and breathtaking beauty.
Absolutely. And they invite us to explore, to learn, and to experience the world with a sense of curiosity, appreciation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question.
Okay, hit me.
If you could witness the Aurora Borealis anywhere in the world, where would it be and why?
Tough one. Would you choose a secluded cabin in the Alaskan wilderness?
Oh, I love that.
Surrounded by snow-covered forests, or maybe a glass-domed igloo in Iceland, offering those panoramic views of the night sky.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Or maybe you'd prefer to see those lights dancing above a majestic fjord in Norway.
Ooh, good one. Let your imagination run wild. And hey, maybe even start planning that Aurora adventure. We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity about this incredible natural phenomenon, inspired you to seek out those moments of awe and wonder. The kind that connect us to the universe and to each other.
It's true. Keep looking up, and who knows? You might just find yourself dancing beneath the Northern Lights one day.
That's a wrap on our Northern Lights deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep wondering.